between licensees and consumers. Again, this section is for the Pennsylvania portion of the state exam. And we're breaking this down for you in sections so that it's a little bit easy to absorb. So the act, when we talk about the act, what act are we talking about? Real Estate Licensing and Registration Act. Okay. Permits licensees to form different relationships with consumers. And it encourages agency relationships. And then once you have an agency relationship, you act as a fiduciary for the consumer of real estate services by the express authority of the consumer. All that jibber jabber means, you sign a listing agreement with the seller. When you sign that agreement, you're going to form a relationship with that seller. Most of the time, it's going to be a seller's agent. And then you have a fiduciary responsibility. And we will get into what a fiduciary responsibility means as we get through this. If you sign a buyer agency agreement with a consumer, now you have a fiduciary responsibility with that buyer. Both agreements should have some. Now, if you're acting as a dual agent, you need language in the buyer agency agreement and the listing agreement stating that you have the authority to act as a dual agent. At our office, our listing agreements are pre-printed, and it gives authority for us to act as a dual agent. On the buyer agency agreements that we use, it's pre-printed in there that we have the authority to represent him as a dual agent. And the consumer is the person who is the recipient of any real estate services, So the possible roles, the principal is the consumer who entered into a relationship, an agency relationship with you, with the broker. And we talked about the seller agent. That role, the licensee enters into a relationship, and the broker enters into a relationship with the seller. Subagent for the seller. And subagent was on that consumer notice too that we passed out. This would be if Ellen works for broker ABC and Lauren works for broker 123. And Lauren brings Ellen a buyer and says, I have a buyer who wants to make an offer on your property, but I'm not representing the buyer. I want to be a subagent for the seller. This way, Ellen is representing the seller as the broker, and then the agent would be working underneath the broker representing the seller, and Lauren would be a sub-agent for the seller. Okay. Not done very commonly. We don't do it at all in my office. Okay, but it's an option. Okay. Then you have the listing broker, again, engaged in marketing the property. That's a role you can have. Dual agency. We talked about a dual agency is where the broker is representing both parties, the buyer and the seller. And in Pennsylvania, that's permissible. Designated agent. I'm the broker. Ellen's representing the buyer. Lauren's representing the seller. I'm the broker. I could say, Lauren, you're going to be a designated agent for the seller. Ellen, you're a designated agent for the buyer. And then I would be, as the broker, acting TAM as a dual agent. Okay. Transaction licensee is the licensee who provides communication or document preparation services or performs other acts listed in a definition of a broker and a salesperson without being an agent for the consumer. Transaction licensee, Jared, no agency relationship. No agency relationship. Okay? We talked about the consumer notice. The broker determines the role that the licensees may assume. The broker does, right? Licensees must provide the consumer notice at the first substantial discussion. Know that language. The consumer notice must be provided at the first substantial discussion. And notice the notice in the consumer notice, we just passed that out a little bit ago, advises the consumer of the business relationships allowed. So the consumer notice is not a contract. You're just advising the customer of the different roles you can play with the consumer notice. You got that, Ray? Okay. And it helps consumers make informed decisions when hiring an agent. See, before this came into play, when I got started in real estate, there was no buyer agency, Vaughn. And either you represented the seller, if it was your listing, or if it was the buyer, somebody else brought the buyer, they were a sub-agent for the seller. There was not even any buyer agency. So sometimes you hauled a buyer around for months, knew their kids' names, took them to the Dairy Queen for ice cream. 2 months later, you found the house for them, you negotiated the sale, and then you were a sub-agent for the seller. And the consumer says, geez, oh whiz, Vaughn, I thought you were representing me. No, I'm sorry. Either I'm representing the seller or I'm a sub-agent for the seller. So that's why they changed the law. Does it make sense now why they have buyer agency and why they have it so that you can represent the buyer? Because before that, you didn't represent the buyer.
So there was a lot of trust then that was involved.
What's that?
There was a lot of trust then.
There was a lot of mistrust then, I can tell you that. Okay? Because, you work with somebody for 2-3 months, you didn't have to give them a consumer notice. And they felt like you were representing them. So this clearly puts everybody on a level playing field. Okay? So the general duties of a licensee. The following duties are owned to all consumers of real estate services and may not be waived. Okay? Reasonable and professional skill and care. So you have to give the consumer reasonable professional skill and care. Okay? Honesty, dealing in good faith. Present in a reasonable, predictable period of time all offers, counter offers, notices, and communications to the other parties in writing, except when waived. Okay? So all offers have to be presented to the seller in a reasonable time. So Ray, if you make me an offer, let's say that Tammy has a house listed and it's listed for $1 million and you offer $100,000. Am I required to present that offer?
I guess you are,
Yeah. It doesn't say present all good offers in a reasonable time. It says present all offers. So you have to present that offer in a reasonable amount of time. Okay? You have to comply with the Real Estate Disclosure Act, where you have to disclose all the issues with the property. And if you know of issues that are not on a seller disclosure statement, you as the licensee have to make sure they are disclosed. That's what I was just doing on that phone call I took. Seller disclosure statement on this particular property was filled out, and he didn't mention anything about it being in a flood zone, didn't mention anything about termite infestation, didn't mention anything about the septic, but we had reports showing that. So we're in the process right now of getting the seller to initial those reports and make them part of the seller disclosure statement and give them to the buyer. We want the buyer just to have all the knowledge. And I want the buyer to sign off on the reports that he's aware that there was termite damage or that there's termites wood-boring bees or there's radon gas. We just want the buyer to be aware and then let the buyer make a decision.
What if the seller doesn't want to sign?
then you have to.
Okay.
Just that simple. If the seller doesn't want to disclose, you have to. You have to account for all monies received. You're responsible for that check when the buyer gives it to you for the deposit. So you got to get that over to your broker right away. And proper information at the initial interview. You need to give them the right information. Timely disclosures of any conflict of interest. A lot of times people get into real estate because they want to buy properties, right? So Kristen, let's say you want to buy some properties. You go on a listing appointment. If you think you're interested in buying that property, the first thing out of your mouth after you go over the consumer notice should be, I may be interested in buying this property myself personally. Okay. Okay. You're a dual agent. Ray's the seller. I'm the broker. Ray's the seller. Lexi's the buyer. It's my listing. My buyer. I'm acting as what kind of agent then? Dual agent. Lexi's my daughter. Do you think that could be construed as a conflict of interest? She don't have the same last name as me. Stovall. Simon. So on paper, you would never know she's my daughter. But that could be construed as a conflict of interest. So as soon as she makes an offer on that property, as soon as she looks at that property, I would disclose that I'm showing this to my daughter. Guidance regarding the use of expert advice. You are not an attorney. I think the fine's $2,000 if you practice law and you don't have an attorney's license and you're a licensee. So I always advise everybody before they sign, if you're concerned, please consult an attorney. Okay? Information regarding the status of the transaction. You have to keep your client abreast of what's going on with the transaction. Hey, we're going to order the appraisal tomorrow. We're going to do the home inspections next week. You have to keep your client abreast of the transaction. Information regarding tasks to be completed for settlement, document preparation, legal compliance. So you have to keep your client abreast of what's going on with the transaction. Timely presentation of all offers and counteroffers. So Lexi wants to make an offer, or better yet, let's use Vaughnie as an example. Ray is my listing. I'm the broker. I have your listing, Ray. And I'm working, and Vaughnie makes, and your house is listed for $1 million. Vaughnie works for another company and gives me an offer. Remember, it's listed for $1 million for $100,000. I can't just tell Vaughnie I'm not going to present that offer, because what's the law state? All offers have to be presented in a reasonable time, and I have to present that offer to Ray. So I have to tell Vaughnie, send the offer over, and then I have to send it to Ray. Is Ray going to be upset that he has $1 million listing and I'm giving him a $100,000 offer? Shake your head, yes. Absolutely. But you have to do it. You have a fiduciary responsibility to do it. Okay? And you have to disclose any financial interest at the time the service is being offered. Financing, title constitutes a financial interest. So, and we're going to be going over how you want to disclose that in writing. And I have a form that I'll pass out to you, okay, on disclosing any financial interest you would have. So for example, if I have a partnership with a title company, a lender, I have to disclose that to the consumer, the buyer, at the time the service is being offered, even before that. Okay. Agent's duties depend on the role. We talked about it. It could be a seller agent, buyer agent, dual agent, designated agent, or a transaction licensee. Which one of those five, the agent doesn't represent anybody? What kind? Transaction licensee. Which one of those agency relationships does the agent represent both the seller and the buyer? Dual agency. Buyer agency, no brainer. It represents the buyer. Seller agent, right? No brainer. Represents the seller. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about general ethical responsibilities of the licensee. Ethics. So wasn't the whole reason for the Real Estate Licensing and Registration Act, wasn't the whole reason, Lexi, to make sure that there was not sloppy or what was the other word? What was it? Sloppy or scrupulous activities by the agents, right? So the whole idea here is to build public trust by having trustworthy, honest real estate agents out there doing business. Okay. So some of the ethical responsibilities, you can't give people misleading advice, assurances, or make any representations. Okay. Christine comes to me and says, hey, I want to buy this house. Will it be worth more money next year? What's the right answer to give her?
That's a good question, man.
That's a good question. It depends on the market.
Right.
Not, oh yeah, real estate always goes up in value. And she buys it, there's a housing crash, and it's worth 10% less. My son Paul bought a house last November, 2 Novembers ago. He came to me, he said, Tom, man, I kind of feel like the market's crazy right now. Is this house going to be worth more money if I buy it a year, 2 years, 3 years? I said, Paul, it's going to depend on the market. I can't tell you that. But I can tell you we had dinner last night and he paid $245 for it a year and 3 months ago. And I told him, I said, Paul, that house is probably worth $300,000 today because the market's really crazy. Close to it. He says, yeah, $299. I figured $299. I said, I think you're right on if you wanted to sell that house today. But you don't never know. So you can't tell somebody just to make the deal, oh yeah, houses always go up in value. Right. They always don't. Ask anybody that bought a house in 2007 and then tried to sell it in 2009. Licensees may not give assurances or advice that they know or reasonably should be expected to know is incorrect. Licensees may not knowingly be a party to any material, false, or inaccurate representations in writing regarding the real estate transaction in which are acting in a representative capacity. So let's talk about conflicts of interest. Licensee, you have to disclose in writing. So the disclosure has to be in writing to all parties connected. Okay. The broker who manages rental property may not accept commissions, rebates, or profit on expenditures made by the lessor without the lessor's written consent. What's the long and short of that? If I'm managing somebody's property and it needs a new roof, and I get a bid, and the roofer says to me, Tom, get my bid accepted, and I'll give you 10% of the bid. I can't take that unless I have something in writing from the seller saying I can. Doesn't that just make sense? And again, licensees may not represent more than one party without the written consent of both parties. Disclosure of real estate affiliations. Can you pass this out, Andrea? I'm going to let Andrea pass that out. I'm going to talk a little bit. And it's required because the affiliation may not be evident on the basis of similar names. So a lot of real estate companies may have an affiliation with a title company or a mortgage company. But when I had my mortgage company, it was called Mon Valley Financial. So Mon Valley Financial, and then you guys all know the name of my company, right? It's not Mon Valley Financial, is it? So just because the name, the consumer that would come in and want to buy a house and do a mortgage through Mon Valley Financial had no idea that Mon Valley Financial there was an affiliation there with my company. So we had to have a form like this form right here, signed by the buyer that's getting the services. I had my own title company, okay? Title company wasn't named my real estate company. So I had to have the consumer, before the service was rendered, sign off that there's an affiliation with me and the title company. Okay, and we have this form signed right here, says that there's an affiliation with these two companies, and to let you know that you don't have to use us, you can shop anywhere. Okay, I would know that. The duties of selling, leasing personal property. Okay, again, a lot of people get in the business because one of my agents right now is doing a flip. I said, make sure that the buyer knows that you're a real estate agent. Oh, he knows. I said, make sure it's in writing. Okay, so duties when selling your own property, you have to disclose the license status before the consumer enters into an agreement. You even have to disclose when advertising personal property for sale or rent. So if I have a property I'm selling it through my company, even if I'm not, and I put an ad in the newspaper, that ad better say that I'm a licensed real estate agent in the state of Pennsylvania. Okay, that ad better say that. It's the law. It's the law. You're not allowed to advertise a property for sale, even if you have the listing, without the seller or landlord's written permission. Can't do it. Can't put a sign up in their yard without their written permission. Again, we use TAM pre-printed listing agreements that has all that in it. But you need to know that to pass the state test. Okay. A rental listing referral agent may not publish information about rental properties if the leaseor or property manager states he don't want it included in the list. So you have that when you're a rental listing referral agent. And you know, you guys here in southwestern Pennsylvania, I don't even know a rental listing referral agent. But I can tell you, when we went to Rehoboth, and me and Neen, when we go on vacation, I'm always looking at real estate. I'm always working. I'm stopping and talking to brokers. I'm looking at houses. I'm pulling up on my phone to see what they're worth. Lex will tell you. Huh, Lex? So we stopped in this one place in Rehoboth, and there was a rental listing referral agency. And she had a bunch of people that gave her permission to pass out her information. And then she would give you the pamphlet on these rental units are available, and they would have the contact in there for the principal. The business name. The brokerage company shall advertise only under the business name that's displayed on the license. Okay, so any advertising, any marketing, in my case, has to have, hi Andrea, our full business name. Not abbreviated, just the way it's on the license. Blind ads are prohibited. What's a blind ad? Does anybody know what a blind ad is? I put it, a blind ad, I'll give you an example for employment. So when I put ads on Indeed or something, we always put the name of our company, that we're looking for real estate people that would want to get started in a career in real estate. A blind ad would be if I just put an ad in and said 100,000 a year, call me today. Okay, I'm not saying what I'm advertising. Advertising by the licensee must contain the business name of the employing broker. So if an agent wants to do a billboard, he can't do a billboard with just his picture on it. Can't do a business and his name. Can't do a business card. Can't do anything with just his name on it. It always has to have the name of the employing broker. And he can't be more prominent than the employing broker's name. So he can't have his name this big and an employing broker this. They have to both be at least at equal size. Okay. Nicknames must be filed with the commission. Nicknames must be filed with the commission. So for example, my name's Thomas Simon, but I go by Tom. That's considered a nickname. You need to file that. Or Ray, if you have a nickname, they call you the Razor. You have to have that nickname filed with the commission. So if somebody complains about the Razor, the commission can look up who in the heck the Razor is and know it's you, Ray. That's what.
In the car business, you weren't allowed to have a nickname.
No.
No, I don't know why.
They wanted to know who they were dealing with.
Yeah.
Internet advertising and web pages. The licensees or firm advertising or marketing on websites, bulletin boards, discussion groups, the firm and the firm's licensee's name needs to be on there as registered with the commission. So if my agent is advertising properties on Facebook, it better have the name of my company on there. Okay. Any advertising for the office has to have where the office is located at. And information must appear on each page for emails, first and last page. Ethical marketing, lotteries and contests. We don't do a lot of these around here, but anytime you're offering prizes, gifts, free lots, shall contain the following: a description of each prize, certificate, gift, or lot offered. The prerequisite for receiving the award. The limitation on how many awards are being given out. The fair market value of the award or gift, and the odds of winning. That just makes sense, doesn't it? Don't get yourself crazy. And the licensee must contain records with all that. And even if there's not a prize or an award and you're doing something like that, you have to disclosure must be made that there may not be an award available. And the odds of winning. Advertising sales volume. So if you're an agent, our agents always like to advertise how much business they've done. Advertising about sales volume must refer to closed transactions. So if I'm an agent and I sell $5 million, I sell $1 million worth of real estate, and I want to put on my Facebook page I'm a $1 million producer. It has to be $1 million closed volume. Can't be pending volume, can't be listings, has to be closed volume. Advertising about production must identify the municipality. So if I want to say that we're the #1 agent, I have to say in a certain municipality. We're the #1 agency in Ross Straber, or we're the #1 agency in Pennsylvania, or we're the #1 agency in the world, okay? Advertising the number of offices. If I say, hey, I got 150 offices, that has to refer to branch licensed offices, okay? You have to have a license. Each branch office would have to have a license. Harassment, okay? You can't harass somebody, Ray. Now, what would constitute harassment? Jace, what do you think would constitute harassment?
Maybe, even if I just gave them the consumer statement, but then I keep calling them and say, hey, you ready to sign up, ready to sign up?
Yeah, you keep bugging somebody. More, now, what determines how much you bug somebody? The client. I mean, if somebody's gonna list their house, and I talk to them, let's say Seneca calls me, I go out and talk to her. She says, I'm not ready to list today, Tom. I say, okay, Seneca. And I call her every day. You ready to sell, Seneca? You ready to sell? Wouldn't that be construed as harassment?
Yes.
Now, maybe if I called her once a week or once every 2 weeks, that would be acceptable. Okay? So there's a fine line there. There's no black and white. You have to take it. You know, usually what I do is if somebody wants to sell a house, I see what their time frame is. Now, if they're going to say, if they say to me, hey, Tom, I'm going to list this house this week, then I may call them every day and say, hey, have you made a decision? But I'm not ready to go yet. Maybe I'm going to list in the spring, and it's January, it's February. What's today's date? 2nd? 3rd? And I'm calling them every day. Hey, man, that could be construed as harassment. Panic selling. It's when you go to somebody and say, you better sell right now. The values are dropping in the neighborhood because those people are moving in the neighborhood. Okay? Better sell now because the property values are going to go down. So it's not based on intrinsic values of real estate. You're scaring people. You're not allowed to do that. It's panic selling. Promotional land sales is a person who plans to engage in promotional sales must register with the commission, regardless of the property's location. And this is big in Florida. Remember we talked about they had a lot of promotional land sales when Disney was being built? Okay. The commission must grant approval prior to the marketing. Promotions can be offered on radio, mail, TV, would all qualify. When would registration not be required? If it's a promotional land sale, if the property is registered with HUD, or if it falls under, and these definitely would fall under the interstate land sales full disclosure. Remember we talked about that before? You could thank Florida for that. So promotional sales would fall under the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act, where there's certain information you have to give them. What the soil conditions are, right? How many lots are already sold and built on. There's some information. Does anybody have the book? What are some of the requirements for the Interstate Land Sales Disclosure Act? Anybody have any of those requirements? Let's just look them up real quick. Anybody find it yet? Andrea, you can go ahead and get ready to put this video.
You done?
One second, I will be as soon as I talk about this. Anybody find it? the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. You know, one way to do that is go to the back of the book. Okay, Ray, what do you have?
It says Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act, a federal law that regulates.
What page you on?
That's 725.
It's on page 26.
And it's also on page 26. Go ahead, Ray.
It says law that regulates the sale of certain real estate in interest.
What's that? So what are some of the things you have to disclose? Help me out.
The type of title being transferred.
Type of title, what else? What page?
26.
26. What else?
Number of homes currently occupied on the site.
Number of homes occupied. Because if there's no homes, ain't that a warning sign? It could be a swamp.
Availability of recreation facilities.
Availability of recreational facilities. Are there any recreation facilities in that development?
Distance to nearby communities.
Distance to nearby communities.
And utility services and charges and soil conditions in the foundation or construction project.
There you go. What utilities are available, what are the soil conditions like, and so forth. So if Jacob is buying, because he's a speculator, I know, I can tell by looking at him. Plus, I know he likes to dabble with some crypto. So if he sees in a newspaper a lot's for sale 1 mile from Disney for $25,000, he may say, "Holy schmoly, that's a great deal," and buy it without even going down and looking at it. That's what this law is enacted to help, because before he can buy that, they have to disclose all the things that are on page 26. Soil conditions, what utilities available, or any other houses built in that area. Okay, Andrea. So at this point, we are through the real estate fundamentals portion